Hi, this is Debbie from Lime Doodle Design, and thank you for joining me to take a look at the Simon Stamp Stamptember 2021 exclusive from Riley & Company. This is a limited edition stamp set for Stamptember, and as such, once it's gone and won't be restocked. The Riley & Company stamp set for Stamptember has the classic Riley moose, along with a wee Simon Says Stamp dog in the cart. I mean, how adorable is that? The great thing is that the image is already set up for you. You just need to stamp and go. And there are some great snarky sentiments in the set too, to send to those with a humorous side to them. For this image, I wanted to create the simplest of scenes, and very little preparation was needed to do so. Keeping in mind the design rule of thirds, where focal images have more impact if aligned on lines that dissect a panel into three, I drew a line creating a snowy hill 1/3 of the way up the panel. This gives 1/3 snowy hill and 2/3 starry night with Riley and Simon. I did keep an eye on where I wanted the wheels of the cart and Riley's hooves to go. I intended using the over the hill sentiment, so I wanted there to be a downward slope to the hill. I placed Riley and Simon in the Misty and stamped them in VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. When dry, this is a waterproof ink, and I stamped it onto Fabriano Artistico Extra White cold press watercolour card. This card has texture to it, which is great for watercolouring, but not so good for stamping. I stamped several times with a black ink and then eventually pulled out a micron pen and filled in any blank spots. For the background, I planned on using a lot of watery paint, and so to prevent the card from warping, I taped it to an old board. I'm right-handed, and so I turned the board so that I could work quickly from left to right. I painted a more concentrated mix of Daniel Smith watercolours closest to the snow line, and then washed it out over the rest of the sky. To get the gradient blending smoothly, the best way is to work quickly and to try and keep all edges that you want to blend wet if possible. It can be a bit tricky manoeuvring around the outline of the image, and if you want to make this easier, you could cover the images with a masking fluid. This goes on wet and when dry protects the paper underneath. You then rub the masking fluid off to reveal the untouched paper once you've finished painting the background. However, I was happy gently moving my brush around the edges. I didn't do a perfect job, but I knew I'd be colouring the rest of the image anyway and could cover up any slip-ups. The aim is to get the whole area covered and still wet at the same time. No dry edges. This way you could drop in deeper colours into the horizon and water droplets into the side to give interesting blooms. All the time the piece is still wet, you can play around with it. Oh, and the colour I used was a dilute indigo with an indanthrone blue, with just a touch of orange on my palette to knock it back from being too bright for my tastes. For the snowy bank, I simply added a little shadow under the cart and Riley's hoof. I used Shadow Violet and washed the colour out with a wet brush. This pulls the colour down over the snow and gives a soft edge to the shadows. I could have done the next part with watercolours, but I like the way you can create a vignette effect, that darkening around the edges with distress inks. In order to preserve Riley and Simon for painting later on, I stamped the images onto masking paper, trimmed out and added over the two pals. I also cut a piece of masking paper to cover the snowy slope. To apply the distress inks, I used a couple of the new blender brushes from Simon. I do very much like the attention to detail, such as the cover for the brushes to keep your project clean and for keeping them clean when stored. I blended Faded Jeans Distress Oxide and Black Soot Distress Oxide around the edges, leaving that highlight of watercolour showing. It's great how that patch of watercolour directs the eye to Riley and Simon, and the vignette of Distress Oxides around the edge emphasises it too. I used the edge of a craft knife to help me lift the masks off, and I always love the reveal when you do that, seeing that contrast between the covered area and the inked one. Simon's colouring was a given, and so I painted him in a brown mix, and for Riley I still wanted brown but went with a warmer red-brown to contrast with Simon's colouring. The cart I painted red. I mean, is there really ever going to be another colour suitable for a little cart? I'm not sure why I made the slope a wintry one. The image and the sentiments in this set are suitable for year-round use, but I guess because we're heading into the colder months here in the UK, then a winter scene with a starry night sky seemed appropriate. It's nice not to have this card aimed at the holiday season though. There's so much time in the winter months that aren't holiday related, and yet we still need cards for then. I added the mask back on in order to protect from the snowfall I was about to add. I used the fading tiny dot stencil, which I thought fitted really well with that highlight in the sky beaming down on Riley and Simon. The swoosh of the dots fitted with that, and so I held the mask in place while I used a palette knife to swipe grit paste in the Snowfall limited edition set from Tim Holtz. With the snow added, it was just a case of needing some stars, and so I pulled out my palette with a blob of white gouache I like to use. I re-wet the gouache and then splattered liberally over the piece to give a very starry night. I think I'm going to have to keep an eye out for a little pot to keep my gouache in rather than this palette. I lifted the masks and then added a few final touches to the painting of Riley and Simon. My aim here is to always look for highlights and shadows. Too many people colour things very flat using the same mid-values. You get much more of a 3D look if you hit some deep shadows and pale highlights. I think the master of this is Alberto Gava, and it's demonstrated so clearly in the Copics he likes to use. I set the panel aside for now while I worked on the sentiment. I stamped the Over the Hill greeting from the set in clear embossing ink on schoolhouse red card that I had treated with an anti-static powder. I then sprinkled with white embossing powder before heat setting. I used a craft knife and a metal-edged gridded ruler to trim out the sentiment into a banner. I blended a touch of black soot around the edges to mute the colour of the red a touch, and then stapled the piece to the card. I added a piece of foam tape underneath to bump up the sentiment and give it a bit more weight. I added foam tape to the back of the panel and then attached to a card base, cut and scored from ivory card. I keep a stack of card bases ready-made beside me. I make them up when I want to do something crafty but I haven't got the mojo to be creative. I deepened a few shadows again with coloured pencils, and then with a white gel pen I touched up the white areas on Simon which had got a bit lost, and also added a sprinkling of dots to Riley's cheeks and to his behind. I added a few sequins and pearls held in place with Gina K Connect glue, and then called it done. A simple, wintry, but not a holiday card for these two cute pals, Riley and Simon. I'm sure you've heard this many times this month, but these Stamptember collaboration sets are limited edition. Once they sell out, they won't be restocked. Many of the stamp sets sell out in the first day or two, some even as quickly as within the first hour. So if this set grabs your attention, then don't hesitate so you won't be disappointed and miss out. I'll leave links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used, as well as a coordinating link to the blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.